Hello and welcome to Queer Conversations, brought to you by Lesbians on the Loose. In this episode, I'm joined by Vanessa Gonzales, a former chair member and current board member of Rainbow Families. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
So I guess let's start with, can you tell us a little bit more about how you grew up and your upbringing?
Okay, so my parents are migrants. They migrated from South America, from Argentina. I was 9. So I migrated with my mum and dad and my brother and a sister. And we arrived in Australia at the time where there were migrant hostels. So we arrived at a migrant hostel in South Coogee. So it's no longer there today.
So what's a migrant hostel? Sorry, just for our listeners.
So a migrant hostel, it was just accommodation and a place where new migrants had an opportunity to live and to settle in. And for my mother, who was pregnant when she arrived, she learned to speak English there. We were there for a year. We had a lot of support, and then from there on, moved on to other rental places.
So in terms of when you came out, can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
So I was working at a women's health centre, a social worker. Yeah, across the room in one of those meetings, there was a woman, and I was just so besotted that I could hardly speak. It was one of those things where I was just awkward around her. And it was fortunate I was working at a women's health centre because, of course, there were women who identified as a lesbian. I didn't identify as a lesbian at the time. So I could understand and put words to what was happening, and it was pretty instant. I fell madly in love with her, and I'm very close to my family, so it's not like I could keep it a secret, although I knew it might be a surprise. So I rang and told my dad, actually. That's who answered the phone, and he said, I think we should tell your mum, and we'll have a chat about that. And I said, come for dinner. I was in a shared house. I said, come for dinner. I'm thinking they're going to come and congratulate me that I'm so, that I finally worked it out. And I opened the door, and there was my dad, and my mum had these blood red eyes, and it looked like she'd been crying for the last 4 nights since she'd found out that I was a lesbian, and said, is it true, Vanessa, what your father said? So I realised she was in mourning and I was in celebration.
And do you feel that that is indicative of being an Argentinian, the conservatism around?
Look, I think one of the things is with migrants is they're stuck a little bit in the time that they came. So my parents had a view of their native country from when they came, and that was very hard and harsh, a very Catholic country. It was things they didn't talk about. And for my mum, she actually hadn't met any lesbians. So she had a bunch of preconceptions around, like, you can't be, you look pretty, you look like a woman. Yes. So she had a lot of ideas, and she had never met other lesbians, so she didn't know. It wasn't until many years later when Mum and I went back to Argentina as a young lesbian with my mum, and it was kind of interesting that actually there were more out and proud, and there was a community of queer people in Argentina. She had just missed out from 1979 to when we went in the 90s, that kind of piece of history that everywhere had evolved, including her native country. So sometimes it's just around that transition or that migrant experience.
And do you feel that rubbed off on you as well, personally, in your coming out journey?
Look, the great thing about my parents is they wanted me to get an education. They were very committed about that. They're both quite progressive, so I was quite shocked, when they didn't celebrate me initially. They do now, and I have to say, she cried for 2 years, and that is not an exaggeration. She cried for 2 years, but Mum joined PFLAG, and she marched for 10 years or more in the Mardi Gras. And my parents had more of a gay life than I did for a very long time. So they got there in the end, but it was a harder journey. I think for me, in terms of the cultural stuff, because they wanted me to have an education, to be an independent woman, it didn't feel hard for me to follow my heart and do what I do what I felt or what I wanted to do in the world. That's kind of what they asked of me. They said, we came, we gave up family for you to have this opportunity. We want you to have it all. We want you to study and be independent. And my father has always said women should have equal rights to men. And so it didn't feel like a barrier to me. In fact, I was probably quite naive thinking that it would be an issue.
And so we fast forward to, you were saying how besotted you were by this woman, and that's how you came to this self-discovery. Are you still with that same person today?
There's been an evolution of girlfriends. That was my very first girlfriend, an important girlfriend in my early 20s. And I've had, other partners, and I've been on my own for a period of time, all those kind of self-discovery things that you do post that.
But you were telling me that today you have your loving partner with 2 sons. So
we have 2 sons, that's right. So I've gone on to be a parent, and that is something that has really surprised my parents and certainly my family in Argentina. It was a bit like the Virgin Mary coming off the plane with those children, like how can a lesbian have children? But I did that. They did not expect that of me. So we have 2 sons, Leo, who's 12, and Joel, who's just turned 9.
What has been the reception, particularly as being a same-sex female couple having 2 sons?
Yeah, I don't know that there's been. Sometimes I think some people worry around role models for them. So some people will talk about that. I feel really fortunate that by the time I had children, it was less of a novel thing in our community. There'd been lots of other people who had children. And when I was thinking of becoming a parent, I very deliberately befriended lots of lesbians and women with women that had children, because I was very curious about how they did it, how they navigated that. And I think I needed to see that it would be okay. I think I needed to kind of have a sense of community. And you go from you do have a very different life, and I think that probably is the case for cisgendered heterosexual people, from having a different life when you don't have children to then when you have children. It kind of becomes about them, and you're in a different time zone even. You're out of the house at 8 in the morning. Who does that? You only do that when you have children. You've been up since 6 in the morning and you think, well, we might as well get up and start the day. You're in bed early. You do very different things than, if you have friends, and I have friends who have chosen not to have children, and they're on a different time frame. If they're texting me at 11, when Leo was little, I'd be breastfeeding, in my pajamas and about to go to bed.
And you were saying how you're now doing the soccer mum duty, going into dropping off your kids to the field to kick the ball. And you were telling me that you are probably one of the only same-sex parents in your school, where your kids are at school.
Yeah, there are others, but you really have to find them. And it's one of those things of like, you have to sometimes, I'm less interested in finding other same-sex parents, but other parents who have similar values or interest as me. But your children choose their friends, and then you hope that they choose friends with parents that you like. So you're doing a lot of that kind of matchmaking when you're a parent. And in the soccer field, certainly in the team that Leo was in, we were the only lesbian parents in that scenario, and often the only ones coming to training and having a pack of dads, straight dads, who decided, who'd have this novel, and it's in the inner west, so we're not that novel, but I still think of like, sometimes they don't know whether to include you with the boys, so they include you a bit in the boys' joke, which is so foreign to me. Yeah, it's different. And there aren't even lots of, like, most of those boys playing soccer have straight mums, but they're not there a lot of the time. So you have to be really comfortable hanging around dads.
And so do you think that schools, yours and the school where your sons are at, have adequate inclusion programs for same-sex parents? Or
I think, look, education has a long way to go. It sees itself as being really inclusive. And look, they do loads to support our children in school. But I remember one year, and not that long ago, and it is an inner west school, so you would expect a different experience, that the teacher had done these tokens for Father's Day that said Father's Day, and they could write what they could do for their dad, like, I'll do a car wash for you, I'll make you breakfast in bed. So Leo didn't know what to do with that, I think. And look, here's a kid that he's lived with a really out and proud mum, and he's been very active in the community. So it might affect another kid worse. But, he was upset in having to cross out father, write mama, decide, was quite ashamed, and particularly around the plebiscite was really quite ashamed of us, went through a period of wishing he had a father and not knowing what to do around that. And so I think they're kind of slip-ups that happened a lot in schools, and a sense of not knowing, accepting diversity but not really embracing and celebrating it. And I think we should come to that. We're not there yet. We're there around multicultural issues. So my son will be very proud of Multicultural Day and celebrate all those aspects of his identity that are about coming from another culture. But I don't feel that that is the case yet, or the awareness or the support, and there's a level of awkwardness. And as you become more diverse parents, I think it's even harder for people to navigate. So gay dads, trans parents, having schools that are really accepting, welcoming and inclusive, I think we have a long way to go in schools, and certainly schools right around Australia.
Absolutely. And if we broaden the discussion, prior to this interview you were saying also the limitations across jurisdictions, did you want to just share that with our listeners about the travel restrictions that you have faced?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things is that we have is people think, we've got rights now, and I'm like, we've got a long way to go with rights. We have some rights and in some places, but they're not universal. So Leo was born just in time when in New South Wales we could have both his mother's names in his birth certificate. He would have peers that have been born in other states that do not have both his parents on the birth certificate. He has peers that have gay dads who don't even have either parent on their birth certificate, like none of their parents in their birth certificate. So there's a lot of issues around that. And then even though he has both his parents in his birth certificate here, if I travel to another country, it may be that they won't recognise that there's two parents. And I think I was giving you the example, if I wanted him to have my, to have my nationality, and some people would like that, or if you had a European passport and you want your children to have European passports, it might be that both of you in your birth certificate here, but say the Italian consulate won't accept that having two parents and being able to give some status to your child as an Italian, for example. So there's always lots of navigations. It's not clear in the same kind of way.
I think that's a lot of things for particularly up and coming same-sex parents or rainbow families to take into consideration. And so tell me a little bit more about rainbow families, and if you could just tell the audience, because I feel that parenting within the queer community is still something that we're all learning and trying to navigate.
Yeah, look, and it's far more accessible than it used to be. I think when I was trying to have, I deeply wanted to be a parent, and I knew that that's something I wanted to do. I had to actively find other people like me who had had children and had been on that journey. And it's, you then do a lot of research around how to have a baby. Rainbow Family now runs a really popular Making Rainbow Families seminars, so that you don't have to, do all that running around and can learn from others that have been through that journey. And it is a different journey for different parents. Lots of people have babies from previous relationships, have parents, through a partner. They might have an in-home insemination. They may do fostering or adoption or surrogacy, and it's so important to have, that information about how to do, the pathways to becoming a parent. Rainbow Families, to me, is a place where there's a lot of great parents. It's a community that's really welcoming. It's all about our children, really, and that's why we're mostly together. We have holidays together. There's lots of programs, parenting programs, support, and just ways for our children to connect with each other. And the great thing that I'm really proud of, and it is unique to New South Wales in a way, is that we have a community that's very inclusive of everyone in the alphabet, in the rainbow alphabet. So trans parents, lesbians, bi, gay dads are all welcome and are all participating. And there was a real concerted effort to say if we wanted to be rainbow families, we had to walk the talk and actively recruit to our committee, now our board, people from that diverse, from our diverse community, and also listen to the lived experience and ensure that everyone feels they belong.
The organisation Rainbow Families, what kind of activities and advocacy work do you do?
So there's been, there's 3 areas. So it's like education, resourcing, connecting. We do lots of social events and ways for people to come together. And welfare and support, like parenting programs, like from antenatal programs where you can go to an antenatal class and not have to explain that you're 2 women, to also doing a lot of advocacy around rights for our community. So we were very active around the plebiscite. We took a whole bunch of families to Canberra around that time, just prior, when our children were in the news all the time, and we had to hear around how terrible it was that they were being raised by these parents or how they suffered. And it was so important for us to do some of that advocacy work. We now have kind of really ridiculous bills in New South Wales Parliament that we want to speak up about all of those things. And at the moment, one of the things that we're concerned about and doing more work around is the importance of rights of children who are born through surrogacy, there's a whole lot of legal complications around their birth certificate, who's on their birth certificate, and risks to some parents around having parenting orders, for example, or just disclosing their relationship to their children, particularly those who were born through international surrogacy.
Is it safe to presume that same-sex male partners go down the surrogacy route more frequently?
There's a lot of ways. We have lots of dads maybe who've had children, with a female couple, with a friend. There's a lot more support now for fostering and certainly for adoption. So we see lots of dads through adoption that have formed children through adoption in the same way, and domestic surrogacy or international surrogacy as well.
So, and we were having this discussion before that the legislation around all these areas are on a state-by-state basis. And you, as a social worker, as you were saying in this area, can you just tell our listeners a little bit more about how families navigate those state-by-state legislation and laws?
Yeah. So my own, I'm a social worker and I've worked in child protection, and I would be helping assess for fostering, for adoption. And at the time, my then partner and I couldn't adopt a child, even though I would have loved to have done that. That would have probably been my first choice. I had an idea I didn't have to biologically be a parent, and I could see the need, but legally I couldn't adopt children unless I lied and pretended I didn't have a partner, certainly pretended not to. And I knew what the assessment process was, and it had to be a lot of lying at the time. So the only thing that we could do is explore ways of having a baby ourselves. That is now changed in New South Wales, but it's not homogeneous around Australia. So there are lots of different rules and exceptions. And not so long ago, there was issues also about lesbians accessing IVF or, fertility treatments. So that's also changed over a period of time. And it was very hard fought by a lot of other parents, really, who fought really hard for those rights, but they're inconsistent around, and you'll find similar children having different experiences.
And just cutting across to a similar topic, do you feel that there is an intergenerational difference amongst parents within our community?
I think there's, there is such a difference. Now it's so much easier to be a parent. You have more of a village once you have one, a different sort of village. It's not a nighttime village, it's a very early morning walk in the park village, but you have a bigger community of friends and support than you did if you were trying to have a baby or trying to be a parent many years ago. And I've seen that. I have some dear friends who are in their 70s and 80s who were role models to me when I was younger, who said, I would have liked to have been a parent, but that wasn't even something I could even imagine. I either had to choose to be married, and I didn't want to do that. So for a long time, I think women thought that all they could do was get married, and many did, I think, a long time ago. Or it was harder, there wasn't a lot of information, it was pre-internet around, those that, the turkey baster, which, I did an in-home insemination. You do not use a turkey baster, it's way too big and unnecessary, but those very early information was hard to come by and then to know to navigate. And there was no legal context for that. So if you did that, there was lots of legal implications for you, there was lots of recognition of the donor as a father. There was lots of, those women were really brave having kids then. And sharing information in order to become parents and being really gutsy and determined. But there's a lot more, certainly legal recognition, support, access to fertility treatments, and being able to go to a hospital and, have both of us registered. You don't have to, choose that really difficult decision between two parents is like who officially goes in the official records, because they've only got one room for mother. There's the other rooms for father. Now you go, yes, there's two parents and we can both be recognised. And there's symbolic things and there are also legal things, but they do have a huge implication. So I have spoken to adults who now, even though they were raised maybe by two women, have a different experience. And I think a lot of that was socially and legally and culturally imposed on them around defining what a family is and what a family looks like. Rather now when, my children proudly have two parents, they happen to be women, and I, have a passport and a birth certificate and those sorts of things. You can register in the school. You don't have to one parent signing all the time. Things that happened a long time ago that didn't support those decisions to become parents.
And I hope that the younger generations will carry on that legacy. To challenge you, because I feel that our listeners will have learned so much from what you've just said, but do you think that there is something that you could learn from the younger generations?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like we've got younger parents, and it's one of the great things to see that it hasn't been such a torturous and tormented path to becoming a parent as it has been probably for me as an older woman and trying to navigate that. I think the gutsiness around being who you are and not caring, I've now challenged, I've called myself a lesbian because it felt radical and it kind of defined, whom I chose to love. But I love that now there isn't this kind of having to define yourself, and I wonder whether I would call myself as a lesbian now. Do I need that? I needed that to be just to own it and say, no, whilst my parents were and all my migrant family were sitting around hoping it was a phase, I needed to really hold on very strongly to a sense of that identity. I'm really loving that. I think there's a lot more fluidity around identity. I think there's also less restrictions around the sort of person you need to be in order to love a woman. You don't have to dress, look, be a certain way. You don't have to define. You don't even have to have she pronouns. If you can be yourself, and I absolutely admire that. And I'm learning a lot all the time about that.
And I'd love to just conclude this interview by asking, what do publications like Lesbians on the Loose mean for you?
Oh, it was so important. It was so amazingly important. And I think it is really important now too. I don't think we have enough visibility. As a very young baby dyke, I used to go to a lot of trouble to find a physical copy of LOTL. I lived in Western Sydney, which wasn't an easy place to get a coffee. You had to go to the Women's Health Centre once I found out they were there. So it saved me a long trip, to the feminist bookshop or to somewhere in Leichhardt in a coffee shop to go and get a copy of that. And at the back, it was kind of the only way you met and made community or friends or found housemates or found out what was on or places you could go to socialise, same-sex dancing or, belly dancing, who knows. But there was endless possibilities through, Lesbians on the Loose. And I have met, important people have become really important in my life through LOTL. I've met housemates that I've shared houses and life and, heartbreaks with and all sorts of things. And I've met, older dykes who are role models to me through LOTL. And, the initial kind of ideas around where to travel. Like I remember even going overseas and LOTL had an idea and options around stories around what it was like overseas and all those sorts of things. Like LOTL was really important.
Absolutely remarkable. Thank you very much, Vanessa. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you like our content, follow us and check out our website, lotl.com, to learn more.